Hello. I'm hosting today because Jason isn't here and Ryan told me I'm hosting. So, hello
I did say that.
everybody. What?
I did say that, yes.
Yeah, so it's Wednesday. We have Rich here to give us a sweet I forget what that thing is again.
I hope it's
It's a
sweet.
sweet demo.
It's a sweet demo, obviously. Of course. Anyway, all right, Rich, so go ahead.
Okay. So Rich Fifarek, I am, in case anybody cares, the Director of IT Security for a FinTech. Prior to that, I was leading the security efforts at SANS. And at SANS, you're sort of forced to learn how to, to be a teacher. So so I sort of continued that when I moved on. And they were nice enough to let me take over and present some stuff. So one of the things that is a critical portion of kind of the Infosec detection and response piece is being able to aggregate all those logs into a useful SIM. And so with the tool Wazuh, I'm going to show you how to do that on the cheap. Now, of course, you'll need hardware and to run this stuff, but for the most part, you can do this all for free. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what Wazuh is. And so those of you who can follow along, if you go to wazuh.com, wazuh.com, you can see their the primary website. So what Wazuh has done is they've taken the excellent tool called OSSEC. Hope I got that website right. And then they've put an Elasticsearch Elastic Stack, ELK stack on top of it. So they've taken the OSSEC and just made it better. So what OSSEC is it's a pretty straightforward little agent that runs on the system and watches the logs and then triggers alerts, triggers active response, which we'll talk about later. And now Wazuh takes that and makes it even better. So Wazuh's not as well known as I would have expected. So it's one of the things we teach in the class. So pretty straightforward. We'll get into how to install it. So let's talk about the components first. For today's demo, I'm going to do an all-in-one install. So all the indexer, the server, and the dashboard, the components listed here, are all installed on a single VM, right? I wouldn't recommend that for production, but as you're starting to test this, as you're starting to develop against it, this is a great way to use that and play with it, right? Then we'll also do an agent install. Fingers crossed the demo gods don't strike, but we'll do an agent install on a Windows host so you can see that piece of the process. For the all-in-one install, we'll just go straight to the quick start. But let's talk about these components. Because it is the ELK stack, so Elasticsearch, Logstash or FileBeats, and Kibana, in a large deployment, you're going to want to have those separated out. And there's going to be a lot of effort put into designing an Elasticsearch cluster if you've got a large install with a lot of agents. That said, if you're looking for a single all-in-one install, the Wazuh project provides a nice sort of sizing option here. Sacrificing an old Dell laptop, definitely a good way to place to start. But if you're just starting out on a small install, you can get away with pretty low resources for that. One of the things that folks often ask me when I start introducing a tool like Wazuh is, well, why don't you just do Splunk? Or why don't you just do, the one we're all familiar with? I love Splunk, don't get me wrong, but it is expensive. And when my team set about figuring out what to do for our SIM, right, which is essentially what Wazuh is going to be for us, then we set about sort of comparing Elastic versus Splunk. What we found is that Elastic was cheaper up until about, for us, and of course it's going to be different for everybody, but somewhere in the neighborhood of north of 50 gigabytes per day of log ingest. Past about 50 gigs, we started to see Splunk hit a plateau, whereas Elasticsearch kept going in a kind of a linear increase in terms of cost and complexity. So for us, we went with Splunk. If you're starting out small, Wazuh is the way to go, in my opinion. Okay, as you can see, the central components, the server side of the components, can run on most of your modern operating systems on the Linux side. And if you want to do the quick start, we'll do a quick demo of what that looks like. Hopefully I remember the password. Hey, I did. And when you see something like this, where it just says, hey, copy paste into a terminal window, what do? You do it without question, right? We're in security. There's no way we could be hacked. Of course, I'm being facetious. You're going to want to download this script and make sure that it is not doing anything nefarious. That's a best practice. But because this is a throwaway VM, I'm not too concerned. So we're going to do it for the demo, and I've gone through it, and it looks pretty solid. So, of course, curl. All right. Demo God struck, of course. This is what I get for reverting the snapshot. Okay, and it's pretty straightforward. Now it's complaining that I don't have enough recommended hardware. I had to lower the hardware for this particular VM to support the webcast we're doing here, but essentially you just run that script and you let it run for a good half an hour. I've already set it up on a separate system, so we'll switch over to that one. Okay, now once it's up and running, you're gonna, let me switch over to my notes. There we go. So if you take the class, Enterprise Security for All, that we teach this in, you'll see some familiar components here. We teach part of this in there, but for the starters, thank you for that. Well-timed promo. Okay, so we're going to start up the service. By default, when you run that quick start script, it will have it start on boot. But because this VM that I'm using for the demo today is targeted towards the class to save resources during class, we have folks manually start it. Okay, now that it's up and running, again, security folks, when you ever see this, obviously just click go. Hide your eyes and click go. Okay, so when you first build Elasticsearch with the quick start method, it will set the passwords for you. For the VM, however, I force everyone to change those passwords. So let's go ahead and do that. Thankfully, Wazuh has a nice built-in tool that allows you to reset those passwords if you ever forget them. I highly recommend that you copy those passwords into a password manager, such as KeePass, 1Password, LastPass. The options are pretty numerous. So what we're doing is we're telling Wazuh to reset the passwords with this shell script tool that it provides. And the -A flag just says reset them all. And you'll see here, it'll spit out a whole slew of new passwords. All right, there we have it. So the one I'm mainly interested in for this demo is the Wazuh password. Okay, it's launching the Wazuh app. Check marks is good. All right, cruising along. Okay, so this is the Wazuh dashboard, the first main login. And the place that you as a security analyst is going to spend the majority of the time is in the security events dashboard. So we'll go there first. Now you'll see that Wazuh right out of the gate has some nice management porn, I guess is the right way to put it. So obviously nice graphs and pie charts and the things that, you know, CISOs like, right? But if you scroll down further, you can actually start to see the raw events that that Wazuh is putting in to the graphs up top here. And if you see something that you're interested in, right, so you can click on it and expand. You're gonna have to go through each one of these and figure out what is legit. Like right out of the gate, this one looks concerning to me, so I would go dig in on this one here. And you can click on the JSON so that you can actually see more detail, the rule that triggered it, and why it triggered it, hopefully. And then you'll want to scroll through here and just kind of look at the various things that are alerting. All right, well, that's kind of interesting from a high-level view. Let's dig in a little harder. So let's click on the Events tab. And we see the same events, but when we expand them, we get a lot more detail and in a nicer format, right? So in this case, it's telling me there might be a possible hidden process from indicating a potential kernel level rootkit. In this case, it's likely a false positive. The system's been built from scratch, so it's unlikely it's been compromised, but you'd want to dig in, right? You can see here any sudos that I've ran when I logged in, right? And the various other rules that trigger. Okay, so you're probably wondering what rules do I have access to? Well, it's actually rather significant. So you want to look at the, go to the rules. You want to go to the management, administration, and then the rules button. And as you can see, at about 15 rows per page, 210 pages, we're looking at about 3,000 rules that is pre-populated by Wazuh, right? And it's a combination of all of the OSSEC rules that come by default, but it also is rules that Wazuh has added themselves. So it's actually quite extensive. If you are interested in a specific category, you can search for things like SSH and see all the rules that apply to SSH. And then the rules file, if you were to go and inspect them individually, right? If you're interested in that rules file, just click on it. And you can see the low-level config syntax here. And it's actually pretty straightforward, right? Pretty easy to understand and follow. And later on, we'll show you how to edit and make some custom ones. Okay. Okay, so if you want to do custom rules, you click on the custom rules button here, and those fall under what's called local rules XML. In this case, they've pre-populated an example rule just an authentication failed from a specific IP rather than generic IP. And you can look at and see what that looks like by digging in on the local rules. Okay, well, so this is all well and done. However, right now, this Wazuh installation is only monitoring the server setup. If I've done my job right, then this server is not seeing a lot of attacks. It's isolated behind firewalls, proxies. It only checks into known good sources, et cetera, et cetera. You aren't browsing the internet from this website. So in general, this server shouldn't see a lot of attacks, right? Okay, so what are we worried about? Well, let's see if we can do the thing that actually makes Wazuh really valuable and deploy it to an agent. So the agent I've chosen for today's demo, assuming I did my job right, is a Windows agent. And the thing I'm going to need to tell it first, whoops, apologies, is what server to connect to for Wazuh. Well, let's find out what my address is. All right, so I run the IP command with the A flag. And in this case, my IP is 10.211.55.11. And for the purposes of the demo, we're just going to assign it to the default group. You can maintain multiple groups. You can have a Windows group, a Linux group. You can have a super secret server network group and a public internet-facing group where you can apply certain rules and apply certain levels of thresholds for how you trigger. And the slick thing is that, particularly with Windows, it gives you exactly the PowerShell invocation to set up the agent. So we're going to copy that command, and then we're going to switch VMs. Maybe. Ryan, is that showing?
I don't see it, but I'm not sure if you put it up yet.
It says it's sharing here. Let me try resharing it.
No, it's probably sharing. Ryan just has to put it on the screen.
Okay. I jinxed it. Of course I did. Come on, computer, you can do it. So I've learned that you have to like talk nice to it. Everybody says, no, 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 no. Be nice, be mean to your computer. No, I've learned just be nice to it.
All right, there we go. Let's see. It's just a black screen right now.
Yeah, okay. Now it's starting to behave again. Hold on a second. Okay, share. Maybe. Okay, it says it's sharing. There it is. Okay. So we're going to copy that command, and then we're going to stick this into PowerShell. Now, this is something that a lot of folks will forget. I've done it myself, so nothing I haven't done. But you want to launch this as admin. So when you click Start, type in PowerShell, you want to right-click, Run as admin, right? And then it'll give you the UAC prompt. Hit yes, because of course you always hit yes. And then if I've done my job right, paste works. Okay, now I run that command. So what it's doing is reaching out to wazuh.com, downloading the correct agent binary for Wazuh, and then it's passing a number of flags to the Wazuh agent, including the address of the server that I want it to connect to. Okay, saw some pop-ups. Now, just to make sure, because I've had this happen before, I'm going to restart the VM to make sure that the agent runs and connects in. All right, now I did my job right. Aha! Now, when you go back to the agent page, okay, let's stop sharing and switch back over. Okay, Ryan. Cue Ryan. All right. So once you get that agent installed, this page will change the display. You obviously have only got one agent right now, but now what it's doing is it's feeding in logs from that agent, and you can see that it's really starting to populate all the things out that you're interested in. So defense evasion, initial access, persistence, right? And this is you're seeing a lot of oftentimes false positives when you initially set this thing up. Every tool like this requires tuning. So don't immediately panic. Don't immediately think, oh no, I'm hacked. Make sure you go in and start tuning these to meet your requirements, and make sure that you understand what it's pushing into these events, right? But as you can see, the agent is really where this thing starts to take off and be really truly valuable, is that you're now feeding in data from all of the systems throughout your network. The systems it supports is pretty extensive, and it does also support the ability to have just standard logs forwarded into OSSEC and then turned into via syslog, via Windows Event Manager, etc., and can then turn those into Wazuh alerts as well. You'll lose some of the active response capabilities there, but it definitely is still valuable to have those input. Okay, so that's how you do an agent. Now for the next piece. Make sure I'm checking my notes here. Let's show you what active response looks like. All right, we're gonna. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're going to attack. Let me free up some resources here. We're gonna simulate an attack, a brute force SSH in our case, and show you what that looks like. The first thing we need to do is take, there we go. We're going to take take the John the Ripper password list, and we're going to turn it into a password list that the tool Hydra, THC Hydra, can turn to use cleanly. Okay. All right, so what I'm doing here, let me zoom in a bit. I'm just removing all the lines that start with comment, the hash sign, hashtag for younger generations, and writing that out to a different password list that I'll use for Hydra. And then we're going to take paste. Okay, so before I fire this off, I'll walk you through it. I'm running Hydra -T, which tells it threads. So I'm only limiting it to 4 threads. So 4 parallel attempts at any given time. I'm going to use -L root. I'm attacking the root account with -P, and I'm supplying it the password list. And then the service that I'm attacking is SSH, and I'm telling it to attack the SSH service on this local host, right? So this is contrived, obviously, for the purposes of the demo, but this should, assuming Wazuh is doing its job, trigger some alerts. So we're going to let that run. All right, that should be enough. Here's hoping. All right, so we're going to walk back to Wazuh. We're going to head over to security events. And we can see all the events from the, whoops, zeroed in here. Just want security events, so don't want, there we go. Okay, so you can see it's starting to trigger alerts for the SSH. User missed the password more than one time. And for the purposes of the active response, I'm actually interested in this one. So I've got this set as a threshold. So SSH alerts me, hey, this has attempted a false, brute force to tried to brute force a password multiple times, and it's hit a maximum, right? So rather than have it just trigger once, because let's be honest, people mistype passwords all the time, we're going to have it trigger on a threshold. And so we're going to trigger on this particular rule ID, right? So 5758 is the rule ID we're going to look for when we set up the active response. Okay, so let's go into the management piece, rules. Oops, management, configuration. And then edit configuration. Now, the first thing we're going to do, by default, Wazuh will ignore allow list. They use the term whitelist. I prefer allow list. They ignore any attacks from localhost. So for the purpose of the demo, we're going to turn that off. So that's the first thing we're going to do. Okay, so let's comment that out. So this is the ignore. And as you can see, the syntax is pretty straightforward. Then we click, let's make sure I got the right one. Okay, now we're going to scroll down further and add the active response. So it's got an example here, but rather than risk typos, I'm going to copy paste this one. Okay, so what I'm telling it to do, that actually didn't cleanly copy paste. So I'm telling it to issue the host deny command, which is defined earlier in the when the location is local, the rule ID that triggers this is 5758, the one we defined earlier or triggered on earlier. And then we're going to tell it after 60 seconds to revert that host deny. So there's two pieces to the puzzle in this case. There's we want to trigger on a certain alert, but we're only going to have that active response be active for 60 seconds. You can change this to be increasing. You can say, okay, so the first time this triggers, lucky number 7 asked, this XML scares me. What reads this? So under the hood, OSSEC, if you go to the OSSEC.net, there's a lot of configuration and syntax stuff. And there's also a syntax checker. The XML itself, Elasticsearch runs Java, but OSSEC does not. So OSSEC's the one primarily reading this. Sad to say. Okay, so once we've got this here, we can have that increase the timeouts, right? And you can have it be permanently denied. It's totally up to you as to what makes sense. 60 seconds is a good start, right? So we'll click save and then hit restart manager. And fingers crossed I did my job right. All right, it restarted fine. Okay. Now we're going to rerun that attack. And this time, it should trigger an active response once it hits a certain threshold of failed logins. And even if they were to get the correct password with the brute force, if the active response has triggered, it won't even let them log in. So this is a very simplistic demo of how you can use this kind of active prevention, HIDs and HIPs kinds of prevention with Wazuh and OSSEC. All right, that should be enough. Now let's head back to events. And there it is, host blocked by host deny active response. So now Wazuh sent a response to the agent running locally on this system and said, hey, don't let this succeed, log in, even if it succeeds with the correct password, right? Because it showed some other suspicious behavior. And then if we wait long enough and refresh this screen, you'll get another log entry that will say, hey, I've removed that block from host deny. So it is that IP is no longer in the host deny. And maybe if I talk long enough, there it is, host unblocked by host deny, right? So that's a pretty powerful feature, and you can really start to see how this will play out in the real world, right? So one of the fun stories, lessons learned from this type of thing is make sure everyone on your team understands how active response works. So John Strand, when I was working at SANS, was teaching a class, and I had sent a new security engineer that I had just recently hired to John's class. And I was pretty confident I had told the security engineer about some of the active response stuff that we do. But John mentioned it in class, and there were on the website, I'm not going to give you the URLs. I don't know if they still exist, actually. There were a few what we call honeypot URLs that we had put up on the website, and they were not linked anywhere. So no Google search engine, Bing, Yahoo, what have you, would pick up on this URL. It was purely hidden in one specific spot that an attacker might go, right? And if you hit that URL, instant block of your IP. John mentioned this in class, and he gave the class the URL, which I didn't realize he was being that specific about it. I thought he was just using the example. And sure enough, my security engineer, without even thinking about it, went to the URL he was like, wow, that's cool. Let me go see. And he blocked the IP address of the conference that he was sitting at. So for, I don't know, half an hour or so, the folks are calling me screaming bloody murder because nobody from the conference can access the sans.org website, which obviously is not a good thing. So be careful. Okay, so that finishes up the demo. Let me kill the screen sharing.
There are a couple questions.
Yeah, I've been seeing them, so I was going to walk through them.
Oh,
Let me
sweet.
switch over here. All right, so let's see. Do the Wazuh agents authenticate against the receiving system? So lucky number 7 asked this question. I believe what is there a communication between the Wazuh agents and the receiving system? And the answer is yes and no, right? They use SSL for the communication piece of the puzzle. However, the way Wazuh works is that if you provide the right information to the Wazuh agent, it will auto-connect. You can set it up to have a more manual process such that you validate in bidirectional using SSL certs and whatnot, that in particular, as it relates to the active response, that the active response is coming from the correct server. Would be cool to configure with MTLS. Correct. Yeah, that would be pretty slick. I haven't looked into that actually.
Did we answer the question from NC Cyber Threat Hunter?
Yeah, I was just headed to that one.
Oh, okay, cool.
Thank you. Can Wazuh server be configured to ingest sysmon logs, or can they only be brought in via the Wazuh agent? That's a good question. I've never dug into just how to get sysmon into Wazuh. I'll have to dig in on that one. Let's see. Scrolling
All
down.
right. Do we have any other questions, guys?
With that limit, you mentioned of 50 gig of log ingest per day. How many agents was the tool installed on for that test case? We did a sort of sample size of, I think it was 10 of our busiest servers, and then extrapolated out. So we didn't do the full 50 gig when we were doing the scoping for Elasticsearch versus Splunk. But our system, our infrastructure is back, let's see, when we were doing the scope was north of 500 systems that would be feeding into Splunk. So that kind of gives you a ballpark of our log ingest per day. Our current Splunk license is now 200 gigs. We started out at around 100 gigs. And now, granted, I work in financial services, so we do far more monitoring of insider threats than most organizations in my experience. Primarily, most organizations are focused on the external threat, which obviously we are as well. But because of the industry that I work in right now, insider threat is treated actually as more important than the external threat. So we ingest quite a bit more logs there. Is Wazuh similar to Nessus? So Nessus does vulnerability scanning. Now there is some level of vulnerability scanning with Wazuh, so there will be some complementary capabilities and features. However, they do it in a very different way. for example, one of the alerts that you might see pop up under Wazuh is this system is out of compliance because it lists a specific compliance thing like PCI or CIS control, right? It'll say, hey, this system's out of compliance with this particular control because it hasn't installed the latest packages, right? It hasn't been on Ubuntu apt-get update, right? Or yum update on RPM, right? RPM-based systems. So it'll flag that as a violation of compliance, out of compliance. It won't specifically say, hey, Nessus, like Nessus will, hey, sir, your system is vulnerable to this particular attack. So that's the fundamental difference there.
Awesome. I don't know if we have any other questions. Last chance in the chat to get some questions.
Counting down.
And if you guys aren't already following us on Twitch, check us out there. Give us a follow. But let's see. I don't think we have any more. We dropped the class in the chat also. So if anybody's interested in heading over to the Antisyphon website and checking out the class, I think, is there an on-demand version of the class or is it just live training?
We are in the process of getting the first full on-demand pushed out. Awesome. We have a couple classes that have been recorded, and John Bevers is working on making that happen. So it's
cool.
Soon is the right answer, I guess. The short answer.
right.
Lucky number 7 asked, "Are you dependent on Kibana?" For Wazuh, yes. Currently, you are dependent on Kibana.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, I think we can wrap it up here if we don't have any other questions. Thanks, Rich, for coming on the channel today to give us this awesome demo. Hopefully everyone here was able to learn something and take something from that.
Hope
now
so.
I'm gonna be Jason and tell Ryan to kill it. Kill the stream, Ryan. Hopefully Jason will be back.